Daily life in Aztec Tenochtitlan followed patterns shaped by religious devotion and urban complexity. The city, founded in 1325 on an island in Lake Texcoco, had grown by the early 1500s into one of the world's largest urban centers, with a population estimated at 200,000 or more. The Aztec Empire controlled much of central Mexico through military conquest and diplomatic alliances, extracting tribute from subject peoples while maintaining a sophisticated civilization centered on this remarkable island capital. Most residents of Tenochtitlan lived as craftspeople, merchants, farmers working chinampas, or members of the military and religious hierarchies that organized Aztec society. Their routines reflected both the practical demands of urban life and the religious beliefs that permeated every aspect of Aztec culture. The physical setting of Tenochtitlan created a unique environment unlike any other major city in the world at that time. The city occupied an island and expanded portions of the lakeshore, connected to the mainland by three major causeways that served as both transportation routes and defensive structures. Canals divided the city into distinct districts, with wooden bridges allowing passage while also serving as barriers that could be removed for defense. The architecture featured stone and adobe buildings, many covered with white stucco that created a brilliant appearance when sunlight reflected off the surfaces. The twin temples of the Templo Mayor dominated the central sacred precinct, their pyramidal forms rising above the surrounding structures and serving as the heart of Aztec religious and political life. Houses in Tenochtitlan varied considerably depending on the residents' social status and occupation. Elite families occupied substantial compounds built around central courtyards, with walls made from stone or adobe brick and roofs constructed from wooden beams supporting layers of clay and plaster. The typical noble residence featured multiple rooms serving different functions, with separate areas for sleeping, receiving guests, storing goods, and conducting household activities. The walls might be decorated with painted designs or murals depicting gods, historical events, or geometric patterns. The floors were covered with woven mats made from reeds, while the furnishings included low platforms for sitting and sleeping, covered with cotton textiles and animal skins. The interiors of Aztec homes remained relatively simple even among the wealthy, with functionality taking precedence over elaborate decoration in most cases. Storage occurred in pottery vessels and wooden chests, with clothing, tools, and other possessions kept organized in these containers. The hearth, consisting of 3 stones supporting cooking vessels over a fire, occupied a central position in the main room, with smoke escaping through the roof or doorway as no chimneys existed. The smell of wood smoke permeated domestic spaces, mixing with the odors of cooking and the various activities of daily life. The atmosphere inside homes combined dimness from limited windows with the warmth from fires and body heat, particularly during cooler months. The daily routine in Tenochtitlan began before dawn with the sound of conch shell trumpets blown from temples calling people to religious observances. The pre-dawn hours held special significance in Aztec religious practice, with priests performing ceremonies to ensure the sun would rise and continue its daily journey across the sky. Ordinary people rose from their sleeping mats and began the day's activities, with household members performing morning ablutions, including washing and prayer. The morning air over the lake carried moisture and the smells of smoke from countless fires, the water and the vegetation of the chinampas. The sounds included not only the ritual instruments from temples, but also the calls of water birds, the splash of canoes moving through canals, and the voices of people beginning their work. Breakfast in Aztec households consisted of simple but nourishing food, with maize forming the foundation of the diet as it had for thousands of years in Mesoamerica. The primary breakfast food was atole, a warm drink made from ground maize mixed with water and sometimes flavored with chili peppers or sweetened with honey. This beverage provided energy for the day's labor while requiring minimal preparation. Tamales, packets of maize dough filled with various ingredients and steamed in corn husks, represented another common morning food. The consumption of breakfast occurred without elaborate ceremony, with family members eating from pottery bowls while sitting on mats, using tortillas to scoop up food or eating with their hands. Chinampas, the famous floating gardens of Tenochtitlan, represented an ingenious agricultural system that allowed intensive food production on the shallow lake. These artificial islands were constructed by anchoring wooden frames in the lake bottom and piling on layers of mud and vegetation until a solid planting surface emerged above water level. The chinampas were separated by canals that provided water for irrigation and served as transportation routes for canoes carrying people and goods. The system supported multiple crops per year, with farmers growing maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chili peppers, and various other plants. The work of maintaining chinampas required constant attention, with farmers adding fresh mud from the lake bottom to maintain fertility, clearing canals of accumulated vegetation, and tending crops throughout their growth cycles. The market of Tlatelolco, adjacent to Tenochtitlan and eventually incorporated into the city, functioned as the largest commercial center in the Aztec world. The market operated daily, though certain days brought larger crowds and more diverse goods. Thousands of people gathered to buy and sell an enormous variety of items, including food, textiles, pottery, tools, featherwork, jewelry, animal skins, live animals, enslaved people, and countless other products from throughout the empire and beyond. The market was organized by product type, with different sections devoted to specific goods, making it easier for buyers to find what they needed. The sounds of the market included the voices of vendors calling out their wares, buyers examining goods and negotiating prices, and the general noise of crowds moving through the commercial spaces. Cacao beans served as a form of currency throughout the Aztec realm, with the beans being counted out for purchases and stored as a form of wealth. The cacao tree grew only in tropical lowlands, so the beans had to be brought to Tenochtitlan through trade or tribute, adding to their value. Beyond their monetary function, cacao beans were ground and mixed with water, chili peppers, and various flavorings to create chocolatl, a bitter beverage consumed primarily by nobles and warriors. The preparation and consumption of chocolate occurred with considerable ceremony, reflecting its status as a luxury item associated with elite culture and religious ritual. Craft production represented important economic activity in Tenochtitlan, with specialized workers creating the various goods needed for daily life and the luxury items demanded by the elite. Feather workers enjoyed particularly high status, as their craft produced the elaborate headdresses, shields, and cloaks that served as status symbols and diplomatic gifts. These artisans worked with feathers from tropical birds, including the resplendent quetzal, using techniques that involved tying individual feathers to cloth or paper bases to create intricate designs. The finished products displayed brilliant colors and patterns that made Aztec featherwork renowned throughout Mesoamerica. The workshops where this delicate work occurred required good lighting and steady hands, with master craftspeople training apprentices in techniques passed down through generations. Gold working and other metallurgy occurred in specialized workshops, with craftspeople using the lost wax casting technique to create intricate jewelry and decorative objects. Gold held special significance as the excrement of the gods in Aztec belief, making gold objects particularly precious. Silver and copper were also worked, though gold remained the most valued metal. The finished pieces included necklaces, ear ornaments, lip plugs, and various other items worn by nobles to display their status. The sound of metal workers hammering and the smell of molten metal characterized these workshops, while the finished products displayed the high level of skill Aztec craftspeople achieved. Education formed an important element of Aztec society, with children receiving instruction in schools that varied by social class and gender. Boys from noble families attended the Calmecac, elite schools where they learned history, religion, astronomy, rhetoric, and military skills, preparing them for positions of leadership. Commoner boys attended the Telpochcali, schools focused more on military training and basic skills. Girls were educated primarily in domestic settings, learning household management, textile production, and religious practices from their mothers and other women. The education of children began early and included physical discipline considered necessary to develop proper character and behavior. Religious observance permeated Aztec life, with an elaborate calendar determining when ceremonies should occur and what rituals were appropriate. The Aztecs followed two interlocking calendars, a 365-day solar calendar and a 260-day ritual calendar, with the combination creating a 52-year cycle of tremendous religious significance. Temples throughout the city served as sites for ceremonies that included offerings of incense, flowers, food, and blood. Human sacrifice represented the most dramatic form of religious offering, with captives taken in warfare being killed in ceremonies believed necessary to maintain cosmic order and ensure the sun continued its daily journey. While modern observers focus on this practice with horror, Aztecs understood it within a religious framework where such offerings represented sacred obligations. The afternoon hours in Tenochtitlan saw continued activity throughout the city, with craftspeople at work in their shops, merchants conducting business, and the general bustle of a large urban center. The canals remained busy with canoes transporting goods and people, their paddlers calling out to clear passage or greeting acquaintances. The causeways carried foot traffic between the city and mainland, with people moving in both directions for various purposes. The sounds included the ongoing noise of markets and workshops, the calls of vendors, and conversations in Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. The smells varied by district, from the earthy odor of chinampas to the various scents of craft production and commerce. Social hierarchy in Aztec society created clear distinctions between nobles who controlled political and military power, commoners who farmed and practiced crafts, and enslaved people who lacked freedom and legal personhood. The Tlatoani, or emperor, ruled with near absolute authority, supported by a complex bureaucracy and military organization. Below the emperor existed various ranks of nobility, with positions determined by birth, military achievement, and royal favor. Commoners could achieve higher status through military valor, with successful warriors receiving land grants and other rewards that improved their economic circumstances and social position. Women in Aztec society occupied complex positions, with their roles varying by social class and life stage. Elite women could inherit property and exercise authority within their households, though their public roles remained limited. Women from all classes engaged in textile production, creating the cotton and maguey fiber cloth essential for clothing and tribute payments. The midwife represented an honored profession for women, with these specialists assisting at births and performing rituals to protect mothers and infants. While Aztec society privileged male activities, particularly warfare and government, women's work was recognized as essential to household and community functioning. Later in the afternoon, as the sun descended toward the western mountains, activities shifted toward preparing for evening. The quality of light changed, becoming warmer and giving the white buildings a golden glow. Shadows lengthened across the city, and the lake reflected the colors of the sunset. The sounds of late afternoon included temple instruments marking the time for evening rituals, voices calling family members home, and the general transition from work to rest. The temperature moderated after the heat of midday, creating more comfortable conditions as evening approached. The main meal of the day occurred in the evening when families gathered to share food. For most Aztecs, this meal consisted of maize tortillas, beans, squash, chili peppers, and whatever other foods were available. The meal might include turkey or dog meat on special occasions, as these domesticated animals provided the primary sources of animal protein. The food was prepared by boiling, roasting over coals, or cooking on a flat griddle called a comal. The consumption of food occurred while sitting on mats, with family members eating from pottery bowls and using tortillas to scoop up other foods. The meal provided not only nourishment, but also an opportunity for family interaction and the transmission of cultural knowledge as elders shared stories and taught proper behavior. Evening hours after the meal brought opportunities for various activities, though most remained within the household as darkness made moving about the city difficult without torches. Families might gather around fires for warmth and light, engaging in conversation or quiet work, such as mending clothes or preparing materials for the next day's tasks. Storytelling served educational and entertainment functions, with tales recounting the deeds of gods and ancestors, teaching moral lessons, and preserving historical knowledge. The telling of stories occurred in the Nahuatl language, with its distinctive sounds and poetic structures, creating verbal art that complemented the visual arts for which the Aztecs are remembered.
Music played a role in Aztec life, particularly during ceremonies and celebrations, with various instruments including drums, rattles, flutes, and shell trumpets, creating distinctive sounds. The music often accompanied dancing and singing, with performances following established patterns and serving religious purposes, as well as providing entertainment. Professional musicians maintained expertise in these traditions, performing at ceremonies and teaching younger generations the proper forms and meanings of various songs and dances. As darkness fell over Tenochtitlan, the city became quieter, though not silent, with temple ceremonies continuing through the night at certain times. The streets and canals became dangerous in darkness, as the absence of street lighting made movement difficult and criminal activity more likely. Inside homes, families prepared for sleep by banking fires, arranging sleeping mats, and settling into the rest period. The night sounds included the calls of night birds over the lake, the distant sounds of temple ceremonies, and the various small noises of a large city at rest. The sky displayed the stars with clarity, these celestial bodies holding religious significance and being carefully observed by Aztec astronomers. Sleeping arrangements consisted of mats woven from reeds, covered with cotton textiles or animal skins, depending on the season and the family's wealth. The night could bring cold temperatures, particularly during the dry season when clear skies allowed rapid heat loss. Families slept together in common areas, with the proximity of bodies providing warmth and security. Dreams held significance in Aztec culture, with certain dreams interpreted as omens or messages from gods that required attention and sometimes consultation with priests who specialized in dream interpretation. The cycle of daily life in Tenochtitlan continued day after day, creating patterns that structured existence in this remarkable city. Individual lives unfolded within the larger contexts of family, kalpuli, or neighborhood unit, and the empire, with each person occupying a specific place in the social hierarchy and participating in the collective activities that sustained Aztec civilization. The combination of agricultural innovation, sophisticated craft production, extensive trade networks, and elaborate religious practices made Tenochtitlan one of the world's great cities. Though Spanish conquest in 1521 would destroy much of this civilization and replace it with colonial structures that fundamentally transformed life in central Mexico. This simple, steady pattern of daily existence in Aztec Tenochtitlan was an ordinary reality for the people who called this island city their home.
Daily life in the Inca Empire followed patterns shaped by mountain geography and imperial organization. The empire, called Tawantinsuyu in the Quechua language, reached its greatest extent in the early 1500s, controlling territories stretching from modern Ecuador through Peru to Chile, encompassing diverse environments from coastal deserts to high mountain valleys. The capital city of Cusco sat in a mountain valley at over 11,000 feet elevation, serving as the political, religious, and administrative center of a civilization that united millions of people through a sophisticated system of governance, infrastructure, and cultural integration. Most people in the empire lived as farmers working terraced fields, herders tending camelid flocks, or craftspeople producing goods for household use and state requirements. Their routines reflected both the practical demands of living at high altitude and the organizational systems imposed by the Inca state. The physical environment of the Andes presented both challenges and opportunities for human settlement. The landscape featured dramatic variations in altitude, with deep valleys, high plateaus, and snow-capped peaks creating distinct ecological zones within relatively short distances. The climate varied by elevation, with warm valleys suitable for maize cultivation, temperate zones where potatoes and quinoa grew, and high-altitude pastures where llamas and alpacas grazed. The air at high elevations contained less oxygen, requiring adaptation by people who had lived in these mountains for generations. The landscape showed the effects of centuries of Inca engineering, with agricultural terraces transforming steep hillsides into productive farmland, roads cutting across mountains and valleys to connect distant regions, and irrigation systems bringing water from mountain streams to fields and settlements. Houses in Inca settlements reflected both the climate and available materials, with most dwellings constructed from stone and adobe with thatched roofs. The typical house consisted of a single rectangular room with thick stone walls and a steep thatched roof made from ichu grass that provided excellent insulation against cold and rain. The door was low, requiring people to stoop to enter, and represented the only opening in the walls, as windows were not typically included in common dwellings. The floor was packed earth, sometimes covered with woven mats or animal skins. The interior remained dark and cool, with minimal furnishings beyond a few pottery vessels, woven baskets, and stone or wooden tools. The overall impression combined simplicity with functionality, structures designed to shelter families from the often harsh mountain climate. The interiors of Inca homes centered around the hearth, a simple fire pit where cooking occurred and which provided heat during cold nights. Smoke from the fire filled the upper part of the room before escaping through gaps in the thatch or through the doorway, creating a permanent haze that blackened the roof materials. The smell of wood smoke permeated these domestic spaces, mixing with the odors of cooking, stored food, and the various activities of daily life. Sleeping occurred on woven mats or animal skins spread on the floor, with family members huddling together under woolen blankets for warmth during the cold mountain nights. Storage occurred in pottery vessels and woven bags, with dried potatoes, freeze-dried meat, and other preserved foods kept for use during the agricultural off-season. The daily routine in Inca communities began at dawn, with the sun holding special religious significance as the primary deity of Inca religion. The sunrise in the mountains created dramatic effects as light gradually illuminated the peaks before descending into the valleys, marking the transition from the cold darkness of night to the relative warmth of day. People rose from their sleeping arrangements and began the day's activities, with household members performing morning tasks according to their age and gender. The morning air at high altitude felt crisp and thin, carrying the sense of smoke from fires and the various plants that grew at different elevations. The sounds included the calls of birds adapted to mountain life, the voices of people beginning their work, and the bleating of llamas and alpacas being prepared for the day's activities. Breakfast in Inca households consisted of simple food designed to provide energy for physical labor at high altitude. Toasted maize or quinoa mixed with water created a warm drink, while leftover potatoes or other foods from the previous day's meal might be consumed. The preparation of food involved minimal cooking for the morning meal, as the main meal would come later. The consumption of breakfast occurred without elaborate ceremony, with family members eating quickly before beginning their work. Coca leaves, chewed throughout the day by adults, helped alleviate hunger, fatigue, and the effects of high altitude, serving as a mild stimulant that made work more bearable. Agriculture formed the foundation of the Inca economy, with the empire's success depending on its ability to produce sufficient food to feed the population and support the army, government, and religious institutions. The creation of agricultural terraces represented one of the great achievements of Inca engineering, transforming steep mountainsides into stepped fields that prevented erosion while creating microclimates at different elevations. These terraces were built using carefully placed stone retaining walls filled with layers of gravel and soil, creating well-drained planting surfaces where crops could flourish. The construction and maintenance of terraces required enormous investments of labor, organized through the mita system of collective work obligations that all able-bodied adults had to fulfill. The crops grown at different elevations reflected the environmental conditions of each zone. Maize grew in the warmer valleys, serving both as food and as the raw material for chicha, the fermented corn beer that represented the primary beverage in the Inca world. Potatoes grew at higher elevations, with numerous varieties adapted to specific conditions and uses. The Incas developed techniques for freeze-drying potatoes to create chuño, a preserved form that could be stored for years and served as a hedge against crop failure. Quinoa, a high-protein grain, grew well at elevations where other grains would not thrive. The work of planting, tending, and harvesting these crops followed seasonal cycles, with communal labor parties working together to complete tasks more efficiently than individual families could working alone. Animal husbandry represented another crucial element of Inca economy, with llamas and alpacas providing transportation, wool, meat, and other products essential for life in the mountains. These camelids, domesticated thousands of years before the Inca Empire, were well adapted to high altitude and could thrive on the sparse vegetation of mountain pastures. Llamas served primarily as pack animals, capable of carrying loads of up to 100 pounds over mountain trails where wheeled vehicles could not operate. Alpacas produced fine wool that was spun and woven into textiles, ranging from coarse cloth for common use to incredibly fine fabrics reserved for the elite. The herding of these animals required taking them to different pasture areas, as grass in particular locations was consumed, creating a seasonal pattern of movement that occupied herders throughout much of the year. Textile production represented one of the most important economic activities in the Inca Empire, with woven cloth serving multiple functions, including clothing, tribute payments, and a form of wealth storage. Every woman spun thread and wove cloth, with girls learning these skills from their mothers from an early age. The process began with shearing alpacas or llamas to obtain raw wool, which was then cleaned, carded to align the fibers, and spun into thread using a drop spindle. The spinning created thread of varying thickness depending on the desired final product. Weaving occurred on backstrap looms, simple devices where one end attached to a fixed point and the other to a strap around the weaver's back, allowing control of tension through body position. The rhythmic sound of the loom and the steady spin of the spindle represented familiar background noises in Inca communities.
The road system connecting different parts of the empire represented another remarkable achievement of Inca engineering and organization. Two main highways ran north-south, one along the coast and another through the highlands, with numerous connecting routes creating a network of thousands of miles of roads. These roads varied from simple paths to sophisticated constructions featuring stone paving, drainage systems, and suspension bridges spanning river gorges. Way stations called tambos provided shelter and supplies for travelers at regular intervals, while chasquis, relay runners, carried messages throughout the empire using these routes. The movement of goods, people, and information along these roads allowed the Inca state to administer its vast territory and extract resources from subject populations. The mita labor obligation required adult commoners to provide a certain amount of labor to the state each year, working on construction projects, agricultural fields belonging to the state or religious institutions, military service, or other activities as directed by government officials. This system allowed the Incas to mobilize enormous labor forces for major undertakings, such as building roads, agricultural terraces, temples, and fortresses. The work was organized communally,
with groups from different communities laboring together under the supervision of state officials. While the mita represented a significant burden on individual families, it also created the infrastructure and productive capacity that supported the empire's prosperity and power. Religious observance permeated Inca life, with the sun god Inti representing the primary deity, while numerous other gods, spirits, and sacred places received veneration. Temples dedicated to the sun existed throughout the empire, with the Coricancha in Cusco representing the most important and wealthy religious institution. The interior of this temple featured walls covered with gold sheets, creating a brilliant appearance when sunlight entered the sacred spaces. Priests performed ceremonies involving offerings of food, textiles, coca leaves, and, on important occasions, sacrifices of llamas or alpacas. Human sacrifice occurred rarely and only during the most significant religious events or crises. The calendar organized time around agricultural cycles and religious observances, with festivals marking the solstices, harvests, and other important occasions. Women in Inca society occupied specific roles determined by their social position and life stage. Elite women could exercise considerable authority within their households and participated in religious ceremonies, with some serving as priestesses. The Akla, or chosen women, represented a special category selected for their beauty and skill to serve the state and religion, either as wives given to nobles or as priestesses maintaining temples and producing fine textiles for religious and state use. The work of women in textile production was particularly valued, as fine cloth represented a highly prized commodity in a society without coined money. Children in Inca society learned appropriate skills through observation and participation in adult work from relatively young ages. Boys learned agricultural techniques, animal husbandry, and other skills from their fathers and other men, while girls learned spinning, weaving, cooking, and household management from their mothers and other women. Formal education remained limited to the elite, with the sons of nobles learning quipu, the knotted cord system used for record-keeping, along with history, religion, and administrative skills necessary for government service. Most children received informal education through direct participation in the economic and social activities of their communities.
The afternoon hours in Inca communities saw continued work in fields or at other occupations, with the specific activities varying by season and local conditions. The thin mountain air made sustained physical exertion at high altitude more difficult than at lower elevations, requiring people who had not grown up in these environments to adapt gradually. Those born and raised in the mountains developed physiological adaptations, including larger lung capacity and more efficient oxygen use, allowing them to work effectively in conditions that would exhaust lowlanders. The sounds of afternoon work included voices coordinating group labor, the bleating of animals, and the various noises of agricultural and craft activities. Later in the afternoon, as the sun descended toward the western peaks and shadows lengthened across the valleys, activities shifted toward completing the day's essential tasks and preparing for evening. The temperature dropped rapidly as the sun disappeared behind mountains, creating a significant chill that required additional clothing or movement to maintain comfort. The quality of light changed dramatically, becoming golden and then fading to twilight, with little of the prolonged twilight common at lower latitudes. The sounds of late afternoon included voices calling family members to gather, animals being secured for the night, and the general transition from work to rest.
The main meal of the day occurred in the evening, when families gathered around the fire to share food and warmth. For most Incas, this meal consisted of a stew made from potatoes, quinoa, and whatever other ingredients were available, perhaps including dried meat or fresh vegetables when in season. The stew cooked slowly over the fire, its smell filling the small dwelling and creating an atmosphere of domestic comfort despite the simplicity of the setting. The food was consumed from pottery bowls or sometimes from hollowed gourds, using wooden spoons or the hands to transfer food to mouths. Chicha, the corn beer that represented both a nutritious beverage and a mild intoxicant, accompanied the meal when available. Evening hours after the meal brought the household together around the fire for warmth and light, as the temperature outside dropped significantly with sunset. The fire provided the only artificial light beyond the rare use of torches or burning resinous wood, creating an intimate space where family members engaged in conversation, quiet work such as weaving or tool maintenance, or simply rested before sleeping. Storytelling served educational and entertainment functions, with tales recounting the history of the Inca dynasty, the deeds of ancestors, and lessons about proper behavior. The telling of these stories in Quechua preserved cultural knowledge and created bonds between generations. Music played a role in Inca life, particularly during ceremonies and celebrations, with various instruments including panpipes, flutes, drums, and shells being played. The music often featured haunting melodies that seemed to echo the mountain environment, with tones and rhythms that had developed over centuries of Andean cultural tradition. Dancing accompanied much music-making, with communal dances forming important elements of festivals and celebrations that brought communities together and reinforced social bonds. As night fell over the Andes, the temperature dropped further, often reaching freezing even during seasons when daytime temperatures were moderate. Families prepared for sleep by banking the fire so it would maintain some heat through the night without requiring constant attention, arranging sleeping mats and blankets, and settling close together for warmth. The night sounds included the occasional call of night birds, the rustle of wind through ichu grass, and the various small noises of families settling into sleep. The stars displayed with exceptional brilliance at high altitude, these celestial lights holding religious significance and being carefully observed by Inca astronomers who tracked their movements and used them to organize the agricultural calendar. Sleep came to most people in Inca communities as the night deepened, their bodies tired from the day's physical labor at high altitude. The cold made adequate covering essential, with woolen blankets and proximity to family members providing necessary warmth. Dreams might be interpreted as communications from ancestors or gods, messages that deserved attention, and sometimes consultation with specialists in divination. The cycle of daily life in the Inca Empire continued day after day, creating patterns that structured existence in these mountain environments. This simple, steady pattern of daily existence in the Inca Empire was an ordinary reality for the people who called the Andes their home. Daily life in Cahokia followed patterns shaped by river resources and earthwork construction. The city flourished between approximately 1050 and 1350 CE near the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers in what is now southwestern Illinois. At its peak around 1100 CE, Cahokia housed an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 people, making it the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico. The Mississippian culture that centered on Cahokia represented a sophisticated civilization characterized by monumental earthwork construction, extensive trade networks, hierarchical social organization, and an economy based on maize agriculture supplemented by hunting, fishing, and gathering. Most Cahokians lived as farmers, craftspeople, or laborers whose routines reflected both the practical demands of life in the river bottomlands and the social obligations created by the complex chiefdom that organized this remarkable urban center. The physical setting of Cahokia occupied fertile bottomlands along the Mississippi River, with the site chosen for its proximity to waterways that provided transportation, fish, and water, while also creating productive agricultural land through periodic flooding. The landscape featured the massive earthen mounds that gave Mississippian culture its alternative name of mound builders, with over 120 mounds constructed at Cahokia alone. The largest, Monk's Mound, rose in 4 terraces to a height of 100 feet and covered an area of 14 acres at its base, making it the largest earthwork in North America. The central plaza stretched between major mounds, creating a vast open space used for ceremonies, games, and public gatherings. The environment combined river bottomland with upland prairie and forest, providing diverse resources for the population. Houses in Cahokia reflected both social status and the available materials, with most dwellings constructed using a framework of wooden posts covered with woven mats or thatch and walls made from wattle and daub. The typical house consisted of a rectangular structure with a peaked roof, the walls created by weaving branches or reeds between upright posts and then covering this wattle framework with a mixture of clay and grass called daub. The roofs were covered with thatch made from prairie grasses or reeds, creating effective waterproofing. The houses ranged in size from small single-family dwellings to larger structures that might house extended families or serve multiple functions, including storage and craft production. The interiors of Cahokian homes centered around a central hearth where cooking occurred and which provided warmth during cold months. The floor was packed earth, sometimes covered with woven mats. The walls and roof created a relatively dark interior, with light entering primarily through the doorway and the smoke hole in the roof that allowed the escape of smoke from the fire. The furnishings remained minimal, with sleeping platforms along the walls covered with furs and woven blankets, storage baskets and pottery vessels for food and tools, and various implements needed for daily activities. The smell of wood smoke permeated these domestic spaces, mixing with the odors of cooking, stored food, and the river bottomland environment. The daily routine in Cahokia began at dawn, with people rising from their sleeping arrangements and beginning the day's activities. The morning air in the bottomlands often carried mist from the rivers, creating atmospheric conditions that slowly cleared as the sun rose higher. The sounds of morning included the calls of water birds from the nearby wetlands, the voices of people beginning their work, and the various noises of a large settlement awakening. The smell of wood smoke being lit mixed with the earthy scent of the river and the surrounding landscape. Women prepared the morning meal, while men checked on crops or prepared for whatever work the day required.
Breakfast in Cahokian households consisted of simple food, typically including maize in various forms. Hominy, made by treating corn kernels with wood ash to remove the hull and soften the grain, could be boiled into a porridge.
Corn cakes made from ground maize and cooked on flat stones near the fire represented another common breakfast food. The meal might be supplemented with nuts, dried fruits, or whatever other foods were readily available. The consumption of breakfast occurred without elaborate ceremony, with family members eating quickly before beginning their work. Water from the rivers or from wells provided the primary beverage, though various teas made from local plants might be consumed for their flavors or perceived medicinal properties. Agriculture formed the economic foundation of Cahokia, with maize serving as the primary crop that supported the large population. The introduction of more productive varieties of corn around 900 CE had enabled the development of large settlements like Cahokia by providing sufficient calories to support populations that included substantial numbers of people engaged in non-agricultural activities. The fields surrounding Cahokia were cultivated using simple tools, including hoes made from stone or shell blades attached to wooden handles. The work of farming proceeded through seasonal cycles of clearing land, planting, weeding, and harvesting, with entire families participating in agricultural labor. The cultivation of maize followed techniques developed through centuries of experience, with farmers planting corn in hills rather than rows, often interspersing beans and squash in a companion planting system where each crop benefited the others. The corn stalks provided support for climbing bean plants. The beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, benefiting all three crops, and the squash spread across the ground, shading the soil and reducing weed growth. This Three Sisters agricultural system, practiced throughout much of eastern North America, provided a balanced diet when combined with hunting and gathering of wild resources. Hunting and fishing supplemented agricultural production, providing protein and other nutrients not available from plant foods. The rivers and wetlands surrounding Cahokia teemed with fish, while the forests and prairies supported populations of deer, turkey, rabbit, and various other game animals. Hunters used bows and arrows, with the bow technology that reached North America around 500 CE, providing more efficient hunting than the earlier spear and atlatl. The fletched arrows tipped with carefully crafted stone points represented significant investments of skill and time, with master craftspeople creating projectile points through the controlled flaking of stone that required both technical knowledge and considerable practice. Fishing occurred in the rivers and associated wetlands, with people using nets, weirs, traps, and hook and line to capture fish. The construction of fish weirs, permanent or semi-permanent structures that channeled fish into traps, represented communal undertakings that required coordination and shared labor. The catch included various species adapted to the river environment, providing food that could be consumed fresh or preserved through smoking or drying for later use. The smell of fish being processed characterized certain areas of Cahokia, particularly during seasons when fishing was most productive.
The construction and maintenance of the massive earthen mounds represented one of the most distinctive features of Mississippian culture, with these structures requiring enormous investments of labor organized through the authority of chiefs and the social obligations of the population. The mounds were built by carrying soil in baskets from borrow pits and dumping it in designated areas, gradually building up the earthworks basket load by basket load.
The construction of Monk's Mound alone is estimated to have required millions of basket loads of soil moved over many years, representing a staggering commitment of human labor. The mounds served various functions, including platforms for elite residences and temples, burial sites for important individuals, and markers of the sacred landscape that connected earthly and spiritual realms. Craft production represented important economic activity in Cahokia, with specialized workers creating pottery, stone tools, shell beads, copper ornaments, and various other items. The pottery featured distinctive shapes and decoration that characterized Mississippian ceramics, with vessels made by coiling ropes of clay and then smoothing the coils to create walls of even thickness. The finished vessels were decorated with incised or stamped designs before being fired in open fires or simple kilns. The pottery served multiple functions, including cooking, storage, and serving food, with different vessel forms designed for specific purposes. Shell working produced beads, pendants, and gorgets, decorative chest pieces worn by elite individuals from marine shells obtained through long-distance trade. The shells came from the Gulf Coast, carried inland through trade networks that connected Cahokia to distant regions. The working of these shells into finished ornaments required skill and time, with craftspeople using stone tools to cut, grind, and polish the shell into desired forms. The finished pieces served both as personal adornment and as markers of social status, with elaborate shell ornaments indicating high position in the social hierarchy. Social hierarchy in Mississippian society created clear distinctions between a chiefly elite who controlled political and religious authority, a middle group of specialists and minor officials, and the commoner population who provided the agricultural surplus and labor that supported the entire system. The paramount chief, residing atop Monk's Mound in a structure visible throughout Cahokia, wielded considerable authority and was believed to possess special connections to the divine powers that controlled fertility, weather, and other forces crucial to agricultural success. Below the paramount chief existed lesser chiefs, priests, and other elite individuals who managed different aspects of governance and religious practice.
Women in Cahokian society engaged in various activities depending on their social position and life stage. Women from all social classes participated in agricultural work, particularly the labor-intensive tasks of planting, weeding, and harvesting. The processing of harvested crops, including grinding corn and preparing food for storage, occupied considerable time and represented essential women's work. Elite women could inherit positions and exercise authority, though the specific nature of their power remains unclear from the archaeological evidence. The production of pottery represented primarily women's work, with mothers teaching daughters the techniques for creating and decorating vessels. Children in Cahokia learned appropriate skills through observation and participation in adult activities, with education occurring primarily through informal apprenticeship to parents and other community members. Boys learned hunting, fishing, and the skills necessary for agricultural and construction work, while girls learned food processing, pottery making, and other domestic skills. The children of elite families likely received additional instruction in matters of governance, religion, and the knowledge necessary for maintaining their position in the social hierarchy, though the specific forms this education took remain largely unknown.
The afternoon hours in Cahokia saw continued work in fields or at various crafts and other occupations. The central plaza might host the chunky game, a popular sport where players threw spears at a rolling stone disc, with the game serving both as entertainment and as a venue for gambling and social interaction. The plaza also served as a gathering place where people could meet, conduct informal business, and participate in the social life of the community. The sounds of afternoon activity included voices in conversation, the sounds of craft work, and the various noises of a large settlement engaged in productive activity. Religious observance played a central role in Cahokian life, with ceremonies marking the agricultural cycle, honoring ancestors, and maintaining the proper relationship between the human and spiritual worlds. The mounds served as sacred spaces where rituals occurred, with the temples atop major mounds functioning as homes for sacred objects and as venues for ceremonies performed by priests and chiefs. The religious system emphasized the connections between the earthly realm and the sky world, with the sun holding particular significance. The observation of solar alignments marked by post circles that functioned as calendars tracking the solstices and equinoxes demonstrates the sophisticated astronomical knowledge Cahokians possessed. Later in the afternoon, as the day's main work drew toward completion, activities shifted toward preparing for evening. The quality of light changed as the sun descended toward the western horizon, creating dramatic effects across the flat bottomlands and reflecting off the rivers. The temperature moderated after the heat of midday, creating more comfortable conditions. The sounds of late afternoon included voices calling family members to gather, animals being secured if any were kept, and the general transition from work to rest.
The main meal of the day occurred in the evening, when families gathered around the hearth to share food. For most Cahokians, this meal consisted of a stew made from corn, beans, and squash, perhaps including fish or game meat when available. The stew cooked slowly over the fire, its smell filling the dwelling. Wild greens, nuts, and roots gathered from the surrounding landscape added variety and important nutrients to the diet. The food was consumed from pottery bowls, using the hands or pieces of cornbread to transfer food to mouths. The meal provided not only nourishment, but also an opportunity for family interaction and the transmission of cultural knowledge. Evening hours after the meal brought the household together around the fire for warmth and light, as no other source of illumination existed beyond torches made from resinous wood or bundles of dried grass. The fire created an intimate space where family members engaged in conversation, quiet work such as tool making or basket weaving, or simply rested before sleeping. Storytelling served both entertainment and educational functions, with tales recounting the history of the community, the deeds of ancestors, and lessons about proper behavior. The telling of these stories preserved cultural knowledge in a society without writing, ensuring that important information passed from generation to generation. Music and dance played roles in Cahokian life, particularly during ceremonies and celebrations. Various instruments, including drums, rattles, and flutes, created sounds that accompanied singing and dancing. The performances often had religious significance, with movements and songs following traditional patterns believed to influence supernatural forces. The communal nature of these activities reinforced social bonds and provided occasions for the community to come together in shared cultural expression.
As darkness fell over Cahokia, the settlement became quieter, though not entirely silent, as the sounds of the rivers and the nocturnal life of the bottomlands continued through the night. Inside homes, families prepared for sleep by banking the fire so it would maintain some heat through the night, arranging sleeping mats and coverings, and settling into rest. The night sounds included the calls of owls and other night birds, the distant sounds from the rivers, and the various small noises of a large settlement at rest. The stars displayed with clarity when clouds did not obscure the sky, these celestial lights observed and incorporated into the cosmological understandings that guided Cahokian religious practice. Sleep came to most Cahokians as the night deepened, their bodies tired from the day's physical labor. Dreams might be interpreted as messages from ancestors or spirits, communications that deserved attention and sometimes required consultation with religious specialists. The cycle of daily life in Cahokia continued day after day, creating patterns that structured existence in this remarkable urban center. For reasons that remain debated by scholars, Cahokia's population declined significantly after 1200 CE, and the site was largely abandoned by 1350 CE, ending this experiment in urban life in pre-Columbian North America. This simple, steady pattern of daily existence in Mississippian Cahokia was an ordinary reality for the people who called this mound city their home.